3PNR with Admiral. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Admiral. Joining me for this episode again is Dan Spell and Mike Panicello of MUFON. Gentlemen, how you doing?
Doing really well, Adam. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time.
I'm doing well, too. Thank you, Adam.
So we'll open up. I'm sure you guys had enough time to digest this congressional hearing that we witnessed. In short, I wasn't impressed, but I'll get your impression. We'll start with Mike.
Well, I mean, any attention that goes to ufology is a good thing. Could it have been more detailed? Yes, but after seeing the report that they came out with in June, it was pretty thin on details. So I think that kind of gave you an idea of what this congressional hearing was going to show. If you looked at the classified version that was released through a Freedom of Information request by another UFO researcher, it's pretty well redacted. So you can tell that they did more information probably in that closed door session. And you heard several times the speakers saying, well, we'll talk about that in the classified closed door session. But there were a few gems, I think. For example, the two witnesses that were called to testify to the committee mentioned seeing craft and having craft that had propulsion systems that they didn't know about, that's beyond our current capability, showing some of the flight dynamics. One congressman asked if you're telling me that the craft went against the wind without any noticeable propulsion, and the witness responded yes. So and then they mentioned there were some that couldn't be identified, mostly due to insufficient data. So, I mean, in the definition of a UFO, that is a UFO. It's an unknown object. Would they have said that it was extraterrestrial in origin? I don't think they would have. They never said that except for Project Sign back in the 50s, where they said the explanation might be extraterrestrial. But ever since then, the Air Force and all the other branches have always kept it, never gone near that particular topic, and especially not that statement. So, yeah, it's what I expected. But there were a few gems if you look at it.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts, Dan?
I think that it went about as well as I expected it to. I was not expecting any groundbreaking revelations to be provided. They just wouldn't do it at that meeting. I think that on a positive side, at least it is being talked about. And I believe someone said it's the first hearing in 50 years. So trying to look at it in that light, something, it's at least a step in the right direction. I do think that the two people that spoke, Ron Moultrie and the other gentleman, I don't think they were prepared as well as they should have been for this. And maybe, it just seemed like they were ignorant about a whole lot about this topic, and they shouldn't be, given their positions. I liked that the one congressman asked about the UFOs over our missile bases at Malmstrom Air Force Base.
Yeah.
Shutting those down. That was a very pointed and a good question. The answer, of course, was we didn't know about that. And the second one was, it's escaping my mind now. Oh, the Admiral Wilson Memorandum. That was a very good question. And the one witness agreed that that memo would be entered into the congressional record, which I checked, by the way. I checked the congressional record online for that meeting, and there was not even a mention of it.
Huh. There was a lot missing from that. An example would be, here's Congress. They want to hear more about this. right? And they did this congressional hearing. And though I appreciated the two witnesses they brought, one thing that stood out to me as a negative was right at the very beginning, they asked him if he had a love for science fiction, right? Which I thought was kind of underplaying it slightly by doing that. And two, why did they not make the pilots available to these congressional hearings, right? I mean, where are there's several centers up there that are witnessing these objects. Some sophisticated equipment on board of these planes. And at the end of the day, the person observing it, right? A trained professional, a guy at the helm of a very expensive military jet who is trained to make observations especially under pressure, right? Because that's the entire idea of there being a fighter pilot. I mean, I don't know, Dan, what do you think? Why were the pilots not introduced at this congressional hearing?
Boy, on one hand, I want to say they didn't want them there because of what they might say. And if I mean, those pilots like David Fravor have already talked publicly a lot about their encounters.
Right.
But if they wanted to get anything more than that out of them, they would have to take them behind, in a closed chamber for a classified discussion, which of course we won't hear about.
Yeah, we're not privy to that information. And, so people know, I repeat it a lot, Dan has a background of Department of Defense as an agent. So he worked in the government. I don't think our government should be fully transparent about everything because, we got to keep in mind, we have enemies. A lot of our things that we keep locked away are military applications to ultimately protect our country. So I don't think the government should be fully transparent on a lot of stuff. But when it comes to this subject, there's so many holes. And then when they have congressional hearings like this, what ends up happening is people hear the little good parts, and rather than absorb that and expand their own minds, there's that like what it did for me. It was like, well, I feel like they could have covered more. And then, like you said, those other previous subjects, it's like the Congress had no idea they happened, although they did. And I was under the impression they were speaking in a narrative, like maybe like a pre-agreed conversation was happening. All but this guy Gallagher, right? That guy was really pushing for some answers, man. And he was
Gallagher's the one that asked about Malmstrom Air Force Base and the other issue, right? The Wilson memo.
Yeah, and you could see he was a little anguished that they weren't answering the way he thought they should. And then the dialogue or the verbiage came up. Well, we'll speak about this in a closed session. I heard that a lot.
Yeah.
And then they used this verbiage in there, I heard. I didn't hear it anywhere else, nor have I heard it since, but they said the UAP task force. That's new to me. Have you heard of that?
Oh, you mean about the task force? Yeah, I've heard of that.
Huh. The fact that they said
I think
publicly,
they changed it into that new word salad acronym. They trotted out for that new 2-person group.
Yeah.
That was disheartening, by the way. I think one of them may have said they had like 2 or 3 people working that project.
Yeah.
Did you hear that in the hearing?
I heard that. And, again, when you're using the words national security and concern in the same paragraph, you'd think there'd be more than 2 people in that.
One would think so.
Yeah.
If they were really taking it seriously.
So how much it is, we'll start with Mike. Let me get your opinion on this. How much of this congressional hearing, how much does Congress actually already know? And this was more of a formality, in your opinion.
I think this was a formality. I think what you and Dan mentioned about only having a small group working in this task force, it's very similar to what eventually happened to Project Blue Book at the end, where as the project progressed in years, the staff was reduced until finally it was like they were meaningless. There was nothing they could really do, and that seems like that this particular task force is just as neutered as Project Blue Book was. I don't think Congress knows as much as we would think Congress knows. I mean, if there is something out there looking at this, is probably a special access program, and those getting into those and getting access to those is very difficult. You have to have a need to know, and though we do say that the military is under civilian leadership, civilians are our leadership is our politicians, and there are reasons to keep things quiet. There's reasons to limit the access to these projects. And I think in the case of the UFOs, in the case of investigating these, they probably are looking at them. They probably do have some kind of SAT program, but we'll never know the light of it. We'll never know anything about it. And I think that this is smoke and mirrors, probably set up for the same reason Project Blue Book was. Project Blue Book was set up because the public demanded answers to what was going on in the skies. And since the tic-tac-toe videos came out and the other videos, there has been a lot of interest in this. And I think this is the military and the Department of Defense and probably even Congress, a way of just placating the populace. Yeah, we're looking into it, but they're not really looking into it.
Right. And
that's really kind of clear when you saw, like, who cares if you like science fiction or not? I mean, those questions are just fluff questions. They mean nothing. Who cares if the guy likes science fiction or doesn't like science fiction? That should have no bearing on his ability to do his job. So even the questions, like I said, there are some gems. I mean, even though, as Dan said, they were unprepared, they should have been more prepared than they were. And maybe that's even an example of what a joke this task force probably is, in that they don't have either the clearance or the information to answer the questions correctly. Because if they did, they probably would have answered them a little better,
or at least elaborated,
said everything.
That's a problem, though, right? Like, I feel like they shouldn't. I don't know, like, amongst the people asking, because that was a pretty empty room. I was talking to Chris DiPerno about this for MUFON, and the room was relatively clear for something that's catching a concern of national security. And then they used the word threat a lot. They used other, like, some of the verbiage they used made me believe that they have concern for what these objects are. And considering how quote unquote concerned they are, that was an empty room. And though I appreciate that the people asking the questions, like Gallagher and some of these other gentlemen, there should have been people to represent the public in there. Maybe, I don't want to say news, because that's dangerous. Those people ask dumb questions intentionally. I don't know. Get Joe Rogan in there, ask a question, right? Get regular people to ask some questions.
Right.
I don't know why they made it very formal. And unfortunately, it looked to me like they were, at the same time that they were like releasing information, they were kind of debunking it in a very subtle way. Right. Would you agree, Dan?
Mm-hmm. I would.
So I don't know. I would like to see in the future, if they're going to have something like this again, have other people there that they're not government employees, and that they're journalists of some sort. And not even that, like, have a couple of regular people, have a real panel. It's because what I saw play out looked like it was being spoken of in a narrative that where they were comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And it was too quick for them to say things like, well, we'll talk about that in a closed session, especially about the underwater. One gentleman was asking about the underwater scanners and equipment, and they're like, well, we'll talk about it in a closed session. All right, I get it, because we don't want our enemies to know what we're doing down there, right? It's at the end of the day, it is for national security. We do have enemies, but you could say things in ways like, well, this is these things are applications for national security, and preferably we'll speak about them in a closed session. They may or may not connect to this particular subject, but they do, we'll discuss that elsewhere, as opposed to just hushing it. I kind of feel like they were trying to keep the interest a little bit, right?
Right.
Like Mike said, the smoke and mirrors, like something else could be at play here. So, Dan, in the government, while you're working there,
mm-hmm.
And you're in the Department of Defense, right?
Right.
So let's hypothetically say you come across, one of your colleagues comes across a craft. They witness this. There's some video. where do they go from there? What's the chain of command from that point?
Well, it depends on are you talking about military personnel in the course of their duties and they see something, or exactly. A civilian employee?
Well, let's examine both. It's a good perspective for both. Let's start with the civilian one.
Generally, the agency I worked for, there was no method for any reporting like that to take place that I'm aware of.
Right.
An employee of that agency on the weekend and he sees something, he would probably just report it to MUFON like anybody else. But my agency had no vehicle for that at all.
Right. And now let's talk about the militarized one.
Well, that's changing. The military, particularly the Navy, is setting up methodology so that their pilots and other personnel can report this activity without being ridiculed or losing their flight status.
Right.
Now, the Air Force, I'm not sure about. I haven't heard much about what the Air Force is doing. Hopefully, they're doing the same thing.
I would think so. Now that you mentioned, I didn't hear the Air Force mentioned not once.
They're incredibly quiet throughout all of this.
What's up with that?
Sometimes you got to read between the lines. What they're not saying, by not saying anything, they're saying a lot.
Right. Yeah.
We have a lot and we're not talking.
I think a lot of that is the U.S. government plays that role. Like, we're the big kid on the block until something comes along and maybe it's a shot to their pride, right? These things are moving around. We can't really explain them, so we don't want to talk about it, so we don't look like fools. Or
that's right, because we pay for all of that high-tech equipment to rule the skies, to protect our homeland and our allies.
Also, and I speak to a lot of cops, you know that, there's no protocol in any agency anywhere that I could think of that relates to ufology. Now, you would think when you're hearing a congressional hearing and the words national security and threat and unknown objects in our airspace are being thrown around, you'd think that every agency would unite and say, look, we need a protocol so that when one of these are seen, like let's say a cop sees it, right? Or a civilian reports it to a cop. The cop then there witnesses it. You and I had this discussion off podcast. Like, well, what do? Do they report to the FBI? And there's no real answer, and there should be, right? Because again, when you use words like national security and potential threat and blah blah blah, there should be a protocol there. I mean, and
that should get down to the county and municipal level. All first responders should know what to do. And in this case, I'm thinking about what if one of these craft goes down in any small town in America. People need to know how to react to it. And maybe it would be just the military going in and taking over. I don't know.
Sure.
But the local authorities, at least initially, would be responsible.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's
fire department, police department.
Right. That's exactly why we have local authority, because the military's stretch would be too thin to cover every state, every county, every city. That's impossible. It's too much. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm hoping in the near future here, not just congressional hearings, but like statewide, state government come to the conclusion that they should have a protocol, that there's something should be in play. And some of these people that witness these things, it shouldn't be all put on MUFON. It's really unfair. You know what I mean? Especially for, it's not like MUFON's a for-profit large organization. They're putting a major burden. And now that it's coming to public light, it's being acknowledged by the government. It's not just an aha moment. It should be like a sigh or a breath of relief for MUFON. It's like, well, maybe we'll get some resources, right? You think it'd be an intelligent move for our government to say, well, look, we particularly don't want to deal with this, right? Let's say that's the case. Why don't we extend resources to MUFON? They're already doing it. They already have everyone out in the field. They have representatives everywhere. Let's give them some funding. Let's give them some initiatives, some incentives, something, right? Wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah, perfectly.
But instead, we see this dog and pony show we're seeing. So I don't know. I don't know how we move forward from that. So in your field of MUFON, gentlemen, we'll start with Mike. This was just brought to my attention. It probably should be a common sense thing, but abductees being, or experiences as a whole being surveyed or monitored by the government. Have you heard of this?
I mean, I haven't heard of it through MUFON. There's talk of this on the internet, but there's a lot of talk on the internet.
Right.
It's hard to discern what's true and what's not sometimes, what's on there. But I have not heard it through any official channel on MUFON that they have evidence that the government is surveilling these abductees.
Same for you, Dan? Nothing like that?
No, I have not. As far as the government working directly with MUFON, no, nothing at all. Now, I do know that I think MUFON's media director, and Mike, you probably got that email as well, published a reaction to that congressional hearing, and he basically volunteered MUFON to help the government.
You'd think they'd take that. That's a lot of manpower, right?
Yeah,
and it would be substantially low resources to send to MUFON in comparison to somebody. There are 6-figure jobs trying to figure out the homeless situation. Does that sound funny to you? Multiple 6-figure jobs, meaning lots of people making great money, and their think tanks, and their job is to figure out the homeless and the starving. Like, it's crazy. And then you have, again, people in a hearing saying things like national security threat and unknown objects in our closed airspace, and no resources for MUFON. It's insanity. Like, I hardly understand it. So I bring this up to you guys about the contactees because this gentleman told me that he noticed it. I do a lot of off podcast interviews, and it's only for information. And he made me think, if our visitors are here to study us, right, our species and et cetera, and they select certain people for close encounters, and the government takes notice of this, I don't think they'd be directly. I think they would monitor you for it because they would want to study you as well. Well, what's so interesting about this guy? And can we catch this happening? I mean, it makes me wonder how much they know that we don't know. Because I thought to myself, if let's say me, Adam, I'm in charge of the government. I hear this guy down the road is being abducted. It's pretty regular. Well, I would want to study that and see if it's true. And if it is true, I wouldn't even disclose it then, because then I want to say, well, where are they going with this guy? What's happening? There could be another quiet study happening. And so it's not controversy. It's common sense. It's how we behave. So how many contactees are you guys coming across lately anyway?
In Maryland, very relatively few, not many at all.
About you, Mike?
Connecticut doesn't have many. I think we've only had maybe a dozen or so over the course of my time as state director.
It would appear it's slowing down, or their technology's gotten better and people are unaware of it. Or like we discussed in previous podcasts, we have so many things in our home that make it easy to monitor us that they don't really have to really be invasive anymore.
Right.
So I'm not sure. So it's, again, I'm optimistic that younger generations are taking view of all this going on, and some of these more inquisitive people, these curious minds that are educated, are going to get out there. And then you have the billionaires going to space. Something's going to come to light. I think something's brewing. I think something's coming. Do you guys think the same?
Go ahead, Mike. You want to comment on that?
Well, what do you mean by something's coming? Like a first contact by aliens, or just a shift in the public's focus to more interest in finding out the truth?
I think both. Because again, the billionaires are going to space now, and it's not even like they care. Look, Jeff Bezos doesn't care about going to another planet and terraforming. That's not even the closest thing to his mind. He's just doing it because Elon's doing it. Some other billionaires are doing it because they're doing it. And they're bringing celebrities, and they're trying to take a limelight position. And like I said, celebrities go to space. They see something. They're not going to suppress it. And so the double-edged sword, like you said, bringing the public's awareness to it. So I kind of feel like in the next decade, some questions are going to get answered, especially now that we have the James Webb Telescope. It's out there. We're discovering new planets that are relevantly close. I mean, when I say close, I mean 40 light years, 40 million light years, something like 60 years to travel there by today's method of travel in space. Relevantly close. I think we're going to find even the most remote form of bacteria somewhere. I think something's going to take place soon. And I think they're speeding up the process personally. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I would get on board with that. I think that if anything would be discovered, it would be something small like microbial life. They might even go even smaller, just saying there's organic compounds, which they've already said. And they've already came out with there's water now, even on Mars, which was changed from their previous statement. So I could see them saying bacteria or something. Right. Definitely. You're right, because we're going further and further out there now with our probes, and the telescopes. So there's definitely that possibility. Other than like an alien craft landing on the middle of, Grand Central Station's roof and like an Independence Day, I can't see ever having some kind of disclosure. If it was a disclosure of a private nature where the aliens and met with government officials, we'll never know that. We'll need something like them going into Central Park or landing on the White House front lawn. We need something big, and that's the only way we're ever going to get it out.
Right.
And then when you look on the, if you go down the rabbit hole with some of the stuff that's on the internet, and like I said before, it's questionable what's out there. The aliens are always waiting for humanity to raise its consciousness, to raise us as a being to a higher level. And so to get to your second point, where it's, will our youth take an interest in ufology? I think they already do. I work at a college, and it's no secret. I mean, it's a small college. They know I like UFOs, and I'm just a crazy guy who works with other crazy people looking for things in the night sky. Yet they all ask questions.
Thank you, Mike.
Staff and students, but they have their own lives. At the end of the day, they go off and do their own things. But I think society may be changing a little bit, hopefully for the better, and then maybe that should be what we're focusing on is to, if that is true, to raise our consciousness. And I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, I'm not really a believer of that line of thinking, but that might be the best way I can answer your question, because I don't really see the youth getting into it. Right now, they're all involved with TikTok or whatever those things are called, and getting jobs and finishing college. But they do ask questions, and I can tell you that they do ask questions. So maybe.
What do you think, Dan?
Well, some food for thought here. There's a lot of talk out there that these entities, wherever they're from, have a very strong interest in our nuclear programs, nuclear energy and nuclear weaponry.
Right.
And think about what's going on over in Eastern Europe with that madman who's ruling Russia right now. His regime has threatened the use of nuclear weapons. Now, hopefully that will never happen, but it would definitely get the interest of these beings. And if those stories are true, like what happened at Malmstrom, I'm sure they're watching what Putin's doing.
I would agree.
If he does something stupid, even with a tactical nuke on the battlefield in Ukraine, that may provoke a very rapid disclosure.
I would say, yeah, because they want to. I think there's a misconception. I think people think they love us. We're a study. You know what I mean? We're an observation. We're entertainment. The motivation for them to stop nuclear weapons from touching us is that they don't want to lose their study or their entertainment, or, you know what I mean? Like, this is both their science project and entertainment in a sense.
Well, we definitely got their attention right, at the end of World War II and moving forward. Another thing about these weapons is the radiation. I mean, what I've read is it also goes out into space and can impact things out there. I'm not a physicist or anything, but that's another reason that these entities are keenly interested in what we're doing.
Right. Yeah. Not to mention that we've already had some billionaires shoot the ideas about nuking Mars to speed up the terraform process. So yeah, I could see that. Like, that's an insane thought. I guess I understand the science of it, but still, you're going to contaminate a planet we haven't been to yet. Stop it. Yeah. To what Mike was saying too, if they did land in Grand Central Station, unfortunately, there are still people in this country, I say this in every podcast, that are going to be like, nope, that's a devil. That's their mindset. It would take for humanity to view one another as a species, eliminate things like race and eliminate things like religion from our separation. We got a long time to go. I mean, I
think that's, to get to your point, I think that's where the higher consciousness comes from. If you believe that theory, that they're waiting for us to go to a higher consciousness and then they'll make their appearance, it's probably similar to what you were just saying, is getting past the petty human stuff, like what you were saying, your religion and race and social economic background, and this elites versus the poor versus the middle class, and we're all just one.
Yeah, bear in mind too, if we get to a point where we're seeing one another as species, and I think what's going to take place is in the future, like I said this a lot, we'll get Neuralink one day, and then we'll be able to communicate with just a knowing, and you'll be able to see past superficial nonsense. And that's when observers, because at some point you're doing a study of a species, right? If we were doing it, we're watching an ant mound, and one day the ants just one day had an understanding, and war stopped, and they started producing and trying to expand as a species. That's when we would be like, well, I guess it's time to talk to these guys, right? They're past all the bullshit. It's time. I mean, that's what I imagine anyway. Let's get into your show, guys. What do you guys want to do? What's coming up for the show?
Well, I'm opening up our list of shows right now. Just bear with me.
Yeah. I mean, because
keep talking, and I'll open this up and I'll tell you what's coming up.
Yeah, because I'm excited for the show. I listened to the first one, and I mean, it's definitely got the right idea, the definite right direction.
Okay.
And you guys have a laundry list of people you can talk to, right? I mean, you guys are in MUFON, so it's It's a real
our next show, Mike, and you can verify this for me. We're going to be talking about black triangles.
Yes, correct.
In our podcast, those have been seen for a long time. Are they U.S. made, or are they from somewhere else? That's going to be our next show.
What are your thoughts on the triangles, Dan?
I think it's a combination of things. I think probably some of those are U.S. made, could be manned or unmanned, could be drones, but some of them are the true unknown. We don't know what they are.
Right.
It's a combination, and I think that holds true for the other shapes of vehicles that are being seen.
Yeah, I was talking to David Marler about that. He specifically looks into that. And the more you dig into the triangle, I think people think that's new, like the 80s brought it about. But there's studies that show that the triangle's been witnessed in the sky from ancient times. Right?
Exactly right. That's true.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask these questions, man. They're like, well, why are there so many different shapes? And I say this a lot. Why are there so many different kinds of cars, trucks, and buses, and planes and trains? They all have a purpose, right? They're always going to make newer models. Go figure, It's exampled by us all the time. But the triangle in particular, because some of the people I'd spoken to off podcast and the people on podcast, they don't seem aerodynamic. They're very thick, right? Mm-hmm. they don't seem to like turn or bank, or they just, whatever direction they go in, it's like they almost stop and then go that direction. So there's a greater force at hand. Never in ufology have you heard anyone say the sound barrier's been broken, right? They're clearly manipulating space-time, or they're utilizing a technology that allows them to not disturb the air around them, especially when you're talking about objects at the scale and size that some of these people are alleging they see, right?
Oh, yeah. The Phoenix Lights is a classic example of that. What did they say? The one object they saw was like a mile across.
Right. Yeah.
That's pretty darn big.
If you put anything in the air that's a mile across and it's moving even just four knots, it's going to disturb the air around. You're going to hear something. Something's going to be heard. There's going to be reactions to it in the atmosphere. Sounds. I don't know. So and you can't call that many people nuts. And there's no way we have that. I think some triangles belong to us, or maybe other countries, but not all. And certainly Russia doesn't have it, because right now they wouldn't be threatening nukes. They'd be saying, look, we have these in the air. What the hell are you going to do about it?
Right.
Same for China. They'd rub that in our face in a heartbeat.
Oh, I think based on what we've seen in Ukraine, the Russian capability is woefully inadequate. They are nowhere near having centuries ahead of us technology.
Yeah,
they just don't.
They would have took over by now. Would have been over.
Oh yeah, their technology is terrible, and they and China continue to try to steal our information every day. A country that has to steal technology isn't going to have anti-gravity propulsion. They just won't. Right.
It's just not in the cards. And I was confronted with the Hypersonic Missile, and someone was like, well, what do you think of that? I mean, that's got to be retro alien technology. I'm like, I don't think so. It still uses the same. It's basically a faster version of what we have.
Exactly.
What people are witnessing in the air, what our pilots are seeing, they're exhibiting technology we have no shot at replicating, not now anyway. And if we do have black projects, leave them black. We need them there because, again, we do have enemies, and they're
Vladimir Putin's one.
Yeah, and every day that guy wakes up, the only thing on his mind is, how do I destroy the Western world? And if he knew, and I said this before too, like if you're playing chess, you're not going to tell the guy you're playing against exactly what you're doing. That's crazy. He's going to win. Mike, I know you got to depart soon, so we'll start with you. Let's talk about anything else coming up on your show that you want to discuss.
Well, we're going to be talking about Antarctica. We already talked about the secret space program. The black triangles are exciting. As we get better at it, we'll bring in some guests for like some panel interview and get their thoughts on different topics. So, the show will expand over time, but I'm excited for how it's going to develop. At the end, we'll decide whether there's enough evidence that if it's true or false or fact or fiction. But I think it's going to be a good time. I hope it adds to the field of ufology.
So
by the way, guys, I misspoke earlier. Our next show, Adam and Mike, is going to be on the alleged activity of the Third Reich in Antarctica and their involvement with UFOs. That's our next show. Then the one after that will be the one on the black triangles.
Okay. Well, I'll poll both of you on this, because not too in depth because I want to save it for your show. But Mike, what are your thoughts on Antarctica?
Well, it really depends on what sources you use and who you believe, because the main expert, for lack of a better word, is Michael Salla, and he wrote a lot of books on Antarctica and the Nazi influence on Antarctica and the secret space program and anti-grav technology. And he drew a lot of his sourcing for his books on so-called whistleblowers. So, I have questions related to the credibility of the whistleblowers. Some things just don't make sense with what they're saying, and some things that they say contradict their own statements later on. So for me, I think that if you're looking at it through the ufology lens, it's questionable. If you look at it for just the facts that are out there in the historical record, and there is the Nazis did do an expedition to Antarctica. They did take over land in Antarctica. After the war, there was a number of submarines that were missing from the official rosters that were collected by the Allies. And then comparing those to the sunken and captured U-boats, they found that there were a lot of them that were missing. Did they take those to Argentina, as some say, or did they go to Antarctica, or did they do both? That's, again, open to interpretation of the sources. So I think that there is something down there. It's extremely restricted, which is unusual. I don't know why it's so restricted for the access. And the reasons they give for the official reasons for it being restricted is just ridiculous at this point in the game. Humans could survive there. Humans could definitely minimize their impact on the environment if need be. And we're already all over the other parts of the oceans and the islands and all the other continents. There's no reason for us to be restricted from Antarctica. But so I have a real question mark on the Nazis with regards to the ufology aspect. But I do, on the historical side, there is a lot of evidence to show that they were down there and that they did stuff down there, and that there's a lot of questions after the Third Reich fell that would lead to they did not totally cease to exist after the war. So I guess I'm split.
Yeah, I mean, there's a show. I had Lenny DePaul on the show, and he was on a show called Hunting Hitler. And they found a lot of Nazi regime members in South America, a lot. There's actually a little Germany there, a legit town that's all Germans. You could vacation there in the style of Germany, and it was founded in the 40s. So there's a lot of room there for that could, have a parallel to that. The two main people interested in Antarctica are from two very different sides of the spectrum. There's the ufology group, and then there's archaeology. And I'm glad you said what you said, because I was watching, I don't remember the name of the documentary offhand, but I was watching a documentary where they were trying to figure out something about the magnetic field around the Earth and certain parts of the planet. Long story short, they can't get permits to Antarctica for archaeology purposes. I found that weird. And then, at that time, I wasn't really immersed into ufology. It wasn't until later when you hear something in and around the same where they want to investigate something abnormal down there and they're being declined. So, yeah, that's a really bizarre thing. That is very bizarre. And that what their reasoning can't just be for, well, we don't want them to destroy the land. That's crazy. We're everywhere, like you said, we're legitimately everywhere else. I don't know. Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
What comes to my mind, a couple things. One is John Kerry last year, some time ago, went down there on some type of visit. He and other people. Now, maybe that was just climate related because of the melting ice. I'm not sure, but that one raised a kind of a flag for me. And the other thing is there's a story about a U.S. Navy admiral who went down there, and the story is that he engaged in a battle with objects. Mike, Adam, have you heard that story?
Yeah, Admiral Byrd.
Admiral Byrd, that's correct.
Yeah, you can supposedly. Now, there is a YouTube video, it might have been taken down, I don't know, that had Admiral Byrd talking in his own words about what he saw down there. I don't know if that's ever been authenticated or not.
And there was another military gentleman. He ended up, the story is he committed suicide at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was apparently very, very much in the know of what has been going on down there.
Huh.
It's always interesting how all these people in the know commit suicide.
Yeah, and he was very senior too. He was not a low-level guy. I can't think of his name.
That is a bizarre thing too, right? Suicide. I've believe it or not, the more I dig into these subjects, I hear that word more and more often, and it's always someone you would never. Although suicide in general, you never see it coming, but it is bizarre. It always lines up with these people that are in the know of these little subjects.
Yeah, that was James Forrestal, by the way, who supposedly leapt to his death at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And that operation was called High Jump. Admiral Byrd, his alleged battle with UFOs, Operation High Jump, was supposedly the name of it.
What a conclusion to that.
Here's my question on that. Just sorry, I got, but what I don't understand is, so with Roswell, you have all of these witnesses that came forward with deathbed confessions, with even their grandkids or their kids have come forward with, my grandmother or my grandfather told me a story about Roswell, and all the stories line up to some degree. So you have a preponderance of witness evidence showing that there was something at Roswell. And Operation High Jump, was Admiral Byrd taking a battle group of an aircraft carrier, which a modern aircraft carrier is like 5,000 individuals. I think it was smaller back then, but still it's thousands of individuals. Air wings, submarines, destroyers, cruisers. No one else has come forward in the same way that the Roswell witnesses have come forward and said, I was on that. I was a gunner, and this is what I saw. Or I was a cook, and this is what I heard. So why is that? That's my question.
I think this guy fell to his death, and they're like, shit, maybe we shouldn't say anything. That's the only thing I could think of. Because that's a good point. There's one thing we know that, and this is probably why the government compartmentalizes things. Keeping secrets is near impossible with humans. It's near impossible. Like eventually, even those guys that are in the government and they're in the know about these projects for military applications, in their mind, it's not the reason they don't spit that out. And why does that not leak? Because they're very aware that these are the projects that keep us safe. But when it's a juicy, interesting project like ufology or even paranormal, those secrets are hard to keep. So that's why they compartmentalize them so much. Like when you hear Bob Lazar in his interviews, he worked on this project in this room and he answered to directly these people and they did not intermingle. Everyone had their assignments. I think fearfully because of exactly what Bob did, went out there and whistle blew, right? And he was showing his friends, like making videos. And so, because if you had them all in one room and they all knew they could draw conclusions, then the cat's out of the bag. So, I guess to support the idea that this guy's, I don't know why he jumped, but I think it was to kind of maybe convey a message to anyone else that might want to speak. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But here, I'm reading.
It does.
Yeah, Bob got shot at. He was shot at. And it's not just his word saying it. There were other witnesses saying that this happened, like he was shot at. So I don't know. It's a bizarre, the whole idea of us suppressing what we know about ufology as far as the government goes. I understand some of their motivation, but the Antarctica thing, that's got me in a weird space because if I think of it now, I can't think of one, documentary that's specifically for Antarctica. Do you guys know of any?
Do not.
And I watch a lot of documentaries about animals, man. So, and I don't recall ever seeing one like that. Or if I did, it was on the outskirts, but that's not like they went into the continent itself and did any kind of research. I don't know. So before we close out, gentlemen, let's talk about, all right, so let's do this. Let's have you tell everyone about the show, where they could find it.
Want to handle that one, Mike?
Sure. So the show is called Ufology Fact or Fiction. You can find the podcast right now. It's on our YouTube page. So if you just go to YouTube and download, search Ufology Fact or Fiction, you can pull up our page with the podcasts.
And I'll get that. I'll have the links for that in the description as well. So before we close out, Dan, anything you want to add?
Just one thing, if I may put a plug in for my next MUFON Maryland meeting.
Yep.
We are going to have an abductee. Terry Lovelace is going to be our guest. And people are welcome to join us. Everybody's invited. It's going to be held via Zoom again on Saturday, June 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.
And for people that are listening, they would just want to observe or listen. What would they do? Would they email you?
They can send me an email if they want to, or they can go to the MUFON Maryland webpage. I'll post the Zoom link on there.
Okay.
And they can just use that link and tune in. Should be a very interesting discussion with Terry.
Yeah, I might have to listen to that myself, actually, quietly.
Yeah, I'll make sure you get the link, and you too, Mike, if you want.
All right, well, perfect. Well, gentlemen, it has been fantastic again. I'm sure we're going to do it again later down the road. Mike and Dan from MUFON. I'm going to say goodnight to you guys, and say goodnight to anyone listening, and then we're going to talk in post.
All right, Adam. Thank you very much for having me.
Not a problem.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Enjoy, gentlemen. We'll talk shortly.
Take care.